What would you do if your faith was tested in the line of those who hated the Catholicism faith? Last time on Martyrs, we looked at St. Jose Luis Sanchez del Rio, a child martyr in the Cristero War. For the final March Martyr, we are going to be looking at a member of a German resistance group during World War II. This is the story of a fallen white rose. This is the story of St. Alexander Schmorell. Alexander Schmorell was born in Orenburg, Russia, between September 13th and 16th, 1917, since Russia was still using the Julian calendar when he was born. Schmorell's father was Hugo Schmorell, a German-born physician who was raised in the Russian Empire, and Schmorell's mother was Natalia Vendanskaya, a Russian and the daughter of a Russian Orthodox priest. Schmorell was baptized into the Russian Orthodox Church. His mother died of typhus during the Russian Civil War when he was just 2 years old. In 1920, his widowed father married a German woman named Elizabeth Hoffman, who, like him, was raised in Russia. In 1921, the family fled from Russia and moved to Munich, Weimar, Germany. Schmorell was 4 years old at the time. In Germany, he grew up with his step-siblings, Erich Schmorell, born 1921, and Natalie Schmorell, born 1925, as well as his Russian nanny, Feodosia Lapishina. She took his late mother's place in his upbringing. His nanny never learned how to speak German. Because of this, Alexander Schmorell grew up bilingual, speaking both German and Russian natively. His friends gave him the nickname Shurik, a nickname he would be called by his closer friends for the rest of his life. He was declared an Eastern Orthodox Christian who considered himself both German and Russian. As declared in the Gestapo's interrogations, he was a convinced Tsarist and then an arch-enemy of the Bolsheviks. After his arbiter, which is equivalent to a high school diploma, he was called into the Reich labor servants, or this labeling, and then into the Wehrmacht, which is a German army during the Nazi era. In 1937, he volunteered to join the Wehrmacht. At the last moment, however, he had second thoughts and refused to swear the Hitler oath. Surprisingly, he was still allowed to join the Wehrmacht. In 1938, he took part in the Anschluss, the Nazi annexation of Austria, eventually into the invasion of Czechoslovakia. After his military service, the artistically gifted Alexander Schmorell began studies in medicine in 1939 in Hamburg. In the autumn of 1940, he returned with the student corps to Munich, where he came to know Hans Scholl, whom he met through Christopher Probst, his lifelong friend. In June 1942, together with Hans Scholl, began the Nazi movement, the White Rose. Their form of resistance was simple but dangerous, writing leaflets, quoting extensively from the Bible, Aristotle, novelists, as well as Goethe and Schiller, the iconic poets of German bourgeois. The leaflets appealed to what Schmorell and Scholl considered are the German intelligentsia, believing that these people would be easily convinced by the same arguments that also motivated the authors themselves. These leaflets were left in telephone books and public phone booths, mailed to professors and students, and taken by courier to the other universities for distribution. In June 1942, Male students at Ludwig Maximilian University were required to deploy to the Eastern Front over summer break. Schmorell, along with Hans Scholl, Willy Graf, and Jürgen Wittgenstein, served as medics on the Russian front from June to November 1942. During this time, White Rose activities ceased and were not continued until the medics came home from the deployment. While in Russia, Schmorell felt like he was at home. Although he had been born in Russia, he had no memories of his homeland, as he emigrated when he was only 4 years old. In Russia, Schmorell, Scholl, Graf, and Wittgenstein would sneak out of camp at night and would gather at the home of Russian peasants where Schmorell and his friends would take part in Russian festivities. In August of 1942, Schmorell came down with diphtheria. At first, he didn't tell his father and stepmother, as he didn't want to burden them, and he only told them of his sickness after he had recovered. Schmorell and his friends left Russia on October 31st, 1942. Schmorell, who had become infatuated with Russia, considered deserting the Wehrmacht, but decided against it. They returned to Munich on November 5th, 1942. In December of 1942, Schmorell, along with Hans Scholl, sought contact with Professor Kurt Huber. Together in 1943, they wrote the fifth leaflet, Aufruf an alle Deutschen, which means appeal to all Germans, which Schmorell then distributed in Austrian cities. However, on February 18, 1943, Sophie and Hans Scholl went to Ludwig Maximilian University to leave flyers out for the students to read. They were seen by Jacob Schmid, a custodian at the university, who was a Gestapo informer. Schmid alerted the Gestapo, who took Hans and Sophie into custody. Alexander soon learned of their capture. He went to Willy Graf's house with the intention of warning him that Hans and Sophie had been captured. Graf was not at home, so Schmorell left a coded message and went to one of his friend's houses. His friends helped him to get fake papers and gave him food and extra clothing. Schmorell's original plan was to enter a prisoner of war camp for Russian POWs, but the plan fell when his contact did not show up. Schmorell then attempted to escape to Switzerland. Fierce weather forced him back and returned to Munich on February 24th, 1943. At around 10 p.m., the air raid alarm sounded. When Schmorell attempted to enter the air raid shelter, he was recognized by a former girlfriend. The Gestapo were called, and Schmorell was arrested. He was captured by the Gestapo on February 24th, the same day of Hans, Sophie, and Christoph's funeral. During the time between he was captured and his trial, Schmorell was interrogated multiple times. On April 19th, 1943, Alexander Schmorell was put on trial along with 13 other members of the White Rose group. Schmorell, Willy Graf, and Kurt Huber were sentenced to death. The others received prison sentence. Unlike the first trial where the death sentence had been carried out the same day as the verdict, Alexander's execution was delayed as his family petitioned for clemency. After about 2 months of deliberation, a letter came to the prison that said, "I reject all petitions for mercy." It was signed, Adolf Hitler. On July 13th, 1943, Alexander and Kurt Huber were alerted that their execution would happen later that day. After receiving communion from an Orthodox priest, he was allowed to write a last letter to their family. Alexander wrote this to his parents: I'm going with the awareness that I have followed my deepest convictions and the truth. This allows me to meet my hour of death with the conscience at peace. Think of the millions of young men who have lost their lives out on the field. Their fate is the same as mine. In a few hours, I will be in a better life with my mother. I will not forget you. I will ask God to grant you solace and peace. Yours, Schurig. The execution was supposed to be carried out at 5 p.m., but as Schmorell prepared himself, he learned that the execution would be delayed. Several SS officers had appeared at Stadelheim under orders to observe the execution to see how long it took for each man to die. The SS officers were then supposed to report back to their superiors with suggestions on how to shorten or prolong the sufferings of the man being hanged. The officers were put off when they learned that the execution was to be by guillotine and not hanging. They demanded a detailed explanation of how the guillotine worked, so their time was not wasted. The execution was delayed until the SS officers left. The guards came for Alexander a little after 5 p.m. He was led out of his cell and into the courtyard, walking to his death with his head high, and he said to his lawyer, "I'm convinced that my life has to end now, early as it may seem, for I have fulfilled my life's mission. I wouldn't know what else I have to do on this earth." In the execution chamber, the state attorney asked if his name was Alexander Schmorell, to which he replied, "Yes." Then the blade fell, and Alexander Schmorell was no more. Kurt Huber was executed a few minutes later. Completing the act of canonization, Schmorell was glorified as a saint and a passion bearer, equivalent to a martyr, by the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia in Munich, Germany, on February 5th, 2012.